Hello everyone, today is Tuesday of the second week of Lent. So we are entering already into the second topic of our reflections. The first week was about almsgiving, if you remember. And this week we're going to talk about prayer, and the following week about fasting. So it was wonderful, I think, to start with almsgiving. I would like to ask you first, before we start this reflection, if you have been trying to practice it, how has your experience of almsgiving been? And for different people, it might be different. Some of us might find it has been very fulfilling, but some of us might have found that it was quite difficult, especially in the points where Jesus asked us to love as He did. Loving our enemies, praying for them, for those who persecute us, forgiving, bearing with difficulties, if you remember, bearing with wrongs done with patience. So all these were also the spiritual works of mercy, not just the corporal ones. So maybe for some of us, and for myself included, I found it's not so easy to learn to keep loving when it seems that people do not respond, or when your love is not reciprocated. And there were moments I felt that, hey, I'm tired of loving. I don't want to keep on being so generous. I feel as if I'm taken advantage of when people don't do their own part, to love. So this actually, if you have experienced these difficulties or challenges, it actually introduces us to this second week of our reflections on prayer, and specifically on Christian prayer. Why am I saying that? Because this is very important for us as Christians. Prayer is not just about introspection or improving ourselves or trying to live a better moral life. Prayer is very much about asking God for that capacity to love, asking Him to expand our hearts, asking Him to make us more capable to keep on loving when it is difficult, to keep on showing charity to everyone when not everyone responds to you the same way, to try to keep on being selfless when we see selfishness around us, or at least when we perceive it, that people are afraid to give, and you are the one. And He says, and we tend to say, no, why me? Why not the other? Or when it's time to make sacrifices and there's difficulty or resistance. So this week we're going to pray about prayer, to learn from Jesus about how we need to ask God for the capacity to love, and that is the essence of Christian prayer. Now, today's gospel can be quite helpful for us, to enter into this topic of why we need to pray in order to love. Why charity is so much connected to faith, in other words, in our faith in God, and when to take time out to pray. Today in Matthew 23 verse 1 to 12, that's the gospel of today. Matthew chapter 23 verses 1 to 12. Jesus, he speaks about he criticizes the Pharisees and the scribes because they seem to not practice what they preach, and so he tells people, do what they say but don't do what they do, because they don't do what they say. If you allow me to, I'll just go back to this theme of the scribes and the Pharisees and what's really wrong with them, and what can we learn from them. And what does Jesus want to say, or what added thing He wants when He says He came to perfect the law? So as we said the other time, the scribes are those who know, because they are the ones who read, they transcribe, they write the scriptures, etc. So they know the law. And the Pharisees are those who focus a lot on the external practices of the law, the rituals, if you like, the external gestures of piety, so that, as Jesus says in the gospel today, that people can see them and admire them for being so pious and religious. So one knows and the other does. And the problem with what Jesus says, or is trying to teach us, is that they do it without heart. If you remember, Jesus says, love God with mind, heart, and will. So the first one loves God with their minds because they know. These are the scribes. And the Pharisees love God with their will. They do things. Actually, even doing charity can be part of it. Giving alms. If you remember the Pharisee who was praying, comparing himself with the tax collector, he says, I fast, I give alms to the poor, I do many things. And so actually they do things, good things as well. But the lacking part is they don't love God with their hearts. And this is where prayer comes in, and where we as Christians need to grow in more and more in church. To love God with our hearts. In my own words, I'd say to serve with heart. Not just to serve by doing, but to serve by loving. There's this saying, is this a labor of obligation or is this a labor of love? And Jesus is asking us to do a labor, a service of love, to do it with our hearts. Now, since this is Lent, I invite you to do a little examination, especially for those who are serving in church or trying to do a kind of service to others, or maybe even this week when you've tried to practice almsgiving and to practice charity towards others, and maybe for those who have found difficulty. This examination here is how much of heart do we have in that service? And it's about purifying our motivations. Lent is not about punishment. It's not about fasting to punish our bodies. It's not about punishing ourselves even, of examination in that sense. But it's about allowing prayer to purify our motivations for love and for charity. So the examination question is this: what stops you from serving? What is it that happens in your mind or in your heart that makes you resistant to keep on loving? What makes you say, why me? Why should I keep going on, etc.? And I just like to propose this theory, for your examination, that many times when we serve, we have a certain hidden agenda. We are looking for something when we serve, and we're not really doing it for free. And the problem with not praying when we serve is that we think we're doing it for free. So it may sound like a play of words, but it's worth our examination. Are we doing things thinking ideally that we're doing it for free, really for the sake of the other, when deep inside we're looking for something? I'll just give you an example. This week I got quite upset with somebody because I've been trying to do a kind of service, partly because of Lent also, to serve by preparing the food, by cooking, by doing little details so that the person will feel that they're being taken care of, because there's some guests in our house at the moment. So the more I do it, after a few days it was okay because I felt good serving. And then after about a week I started to feel a bit of irritation or resentment that I seem to be the only one doing that service, and why doesn't that person continue or take up the service as well? So what I realized was I was looking for something there, and at one moment I got so upset I said, I'm not going to serve anymore. Why don't you just let these guests take care of themselves? They're adults, they've been in the house long enough, and they should be able to do it, which could be true as well. But deep inside, when I was examining myself, I started to realize in my prayer, I went to pray about it, and I said, Jesus, I'm kind of fed up with serving these people, these guests in the house. And what I understood was from the Lord was, let's talk about it. This is what prayer is. Let's talk about what's bothering you. If love and charity is what children of God do, and if you don't want to, maybe there's something that's not going right. And so this examination was this: what are you looking for? And then I started to realize, I'm doing all this, but they don't appreciate it. I don't feel as if they appreciate my charity, the extra efforts I'm doing, and they seem to even expect it. So I don't feel appreciated. So what was I looking for? Appreciation. And what I understood from the Lord is this: why don't you look for that appreciation from me? You remember Jesus says in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all you who labor and are overburdened, and I will give you rest." And he says, "Shoulder my yoke, learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Many times there's this rest in our souls that we're looking for, a certain kind of reward for the good that we do. And maybe it's not wrong, but the point for us as Christians is, where are we looking for that reward from? No? In which places are we looking for that reward? And the invitation in Lent is to go back to the source of the rewards for all that we do, and that is God Himself. If you remember the reflection on the temptations of Jesus, when Jesus says, "Man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." It's something like that. We are what Jesus is saying is, we are not only satisfied by the physical persons around us, we are satisfied by God, and we need to be satisfied by Him. Our hearts need that. If you remember, He says also, love your neighbor as you love yourself. If we don't learn to satisfy our own needs, our own wants and desires in God, we're going to look for it in others, in our charity, and that could be quite hypocritical, like the Pharisees. We say we're loving others, we say we're serving them and doing charity for them, but actually in that we're looking for something, a reward from them, and then that's not real charity anymore. What I would consider real charity is, first, recognize what you need, what you want, what you are looking for. Present them to the Lord. Seek the satisfaction of these needs and wants and desires in the Lord, and don't repress or deny them. Christianity or Christian charity is not about denying our needs or neglecting them or thinking that they don't exist. Christian love is to recognize that we, being human beings, also need love, also need affection, also need satisfaction, and to try to look for them in Him, and not to hiddenly look for it in others while we serve them. Now, this is not only in people we serve outside who are far from us, who are distant from us. Sometimes it happens at home, in our families, family life, etc., relationships, brothers and sisters. But sometimes we try to do good for them, and we get tired of loving our own relatives and friends and family, maybe because we are looking from them, what we should look for in God. If you remember, the song from Air Supply, "I'm all out of love," I'm all out of love. And then it's like, we're tired of loving, but it's not about looking for that love in the other person. As the same group sings, "Two less lonely people in the world." Oh, I tell you, that could be a disaster if really we look for love in the other, when we should find it, seek it in God. Only God can satisfy certain desires and needs inside of us, and not the other. And when we are satisfied by God, then can we love them like Jesus does. I'm talking about Christian charity, loving our enemies, doing charity for those who don't love us back, or those who take us for granted, and to keep on loving. That takes a different kind of capacity that comes from God. And that is why we pray. That's why we say, "Give us today our daily bread," because we need it. Help us to forgive, because we don't know how to keep on forgiving when we don't have the power of prayer, the power of God's love in us first. So this week, let us ponder really the connection between almsgiving and prayer, and why we need to pray in order to support our almsgiving, or in other words, to support our charity as much as Jesus loves. And this week, in moments when you find that you don't feel like, or you're resistant to keep on loving, especially the same person, same situation, or something that is difficult, let us go back again and say, are you praying? Are you still just loving with your mind and with your will, but not with heart? Because maybe you have not allowed the Lord or allowed God to love you in your heart, to allow yourself to be loved by Him first, and before you love others. We live and exist for this, to love and to be loved. And we need both. We cannot just love without being loved ourselves, especially to be loved by God. So when you feel fed up with loving, allow God to ask you, what are you looking for? What do you need? What are your desires at this moment? And let Him be the one to fill them and to talk to Him. I suggest to you this passage for today's reading, actually, the first reading, Isaiah chapter 1, verses 10 to 18. Especially in 18, it says, "Come, let's talk. It's not your sacrifice with which I have problems, but perhaps there's something in your heart that's not right, that is not met, a need that is not met, or a desire that is not expressed. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about this, and then we will have the capacity to continue loving joyfully and enjoy our almsgiving as Jesus would have done."